And for Unit 5, we get into parts of exhibit planning that a lot of designers pretty much don't do anything with at all. And that's the psychology of how the visitors view and interact and do what we call recreational learning with the exhibits. In other words, an exhibit designer needs to have training in recreational learning or in educational psychology. An exhibit has to do more than just look pretty to work. It has to think about how visitors learn and remember. So this unit is a smaller unit, and it's going to focus on what we call our exhibit classification matrix and exhibit load. And that's going to be that one right there. This is the handout that's attached to this unit. It's on page 3. And what exhibit load is, when visitors enter a museum or a visitor center or an exhibit area, they come with, let's say, a gallon of energy or enthusiasm. And as they go to each exhibit, what happens is they use up some of that energy and enthusiasm. And so what exhibit load does is it sucks out of them a lot of energy. And they may have more energy when they first start the exhibit experience, but by the time they're getting close to the end, they're pretty much window shopping and moving through. So what the exhibit load concept does is it helps to kind of monitor how the exhibits work. So there's a balance of different types of exhibits. So in the matrix, there we go, we have type 1, type 2, and type 3 exhibits. Now, a type 1 exhibit is where the exhibit does something and the visitor does something. It's an interactive exhibit. You pull the lever and a bell rings. Now, type 1 exhibits have the highest attraction power. People are drawn to exhibits that do something. Type 1 exhibits are the most expensive exhibits to design and build, and they also are exhibits that have a maintenance cost with them. And too many type 1 exhibits tend to burn people out, like a science museum would. So we only want about 20% of our exhibits to be type 1s. And remember, people remember 90% of what they do, so we want our type 1 exhibits to really have the essence of the theme that you're interpreting. The next one on our list is a type 2A. And a type 2A is where the exhibit doesn't do anything, but the visitor does something. So you might have a rock with fossils in it, and the visitor takes a magnifying glass and looks at the fossils. The visitor does all the work, but the exhibit just sits there. A type 2B is just the opposite. That's where the exhibit does all the moving and the visitor just watches it. So like watching fish in an aquarium. And those are what we call moderate or medium load. They're really what I call the workhorses of the exhibits. And we want about 60% of our exhibits to be type 2s. And the type 3 exhibit is where the visitor does nothing and the exhibit does nothing. Basic flat work, graphics, artifacts, and a glass case, things like that. And these have the lowest intrinsic interest of all the exhibits. They're the cheapest to design, build, and install, which is why sometimes when you get an exhibit budget, you end up with mostly type 3 exhibits. Remember, exhibits cost about $400 per square foot of floor space. And the way it works is, let's say you have $1 to spend on exhibits. 25 cents is design, that's the design fee. Another 15-20% is delivery and installation. So essentially, out of your $1, you actually only have maybe 50-60 cents that actually buys the exhibit materials and the graphics and the carpeting and all that. So if you have a budget of $1 for exhibits, you're really done. You really have about 60 cents that buys exhibits. So that's what happens when you think about that. That's why the designers end up with more type 3s, because they're cheaper. They're cheaper to do, but they're also more boring, and visitors tend just to walk by. There's ways of fixing that, and that's by what goes in the exhibit. So real artifacts, the real thing, the real dinosaur bone, has a lot of attraction and holding power. And so it makes up from having an exhibit that's a replica of a dinosaur bone. And a replica makes up for just having a picture of a dinosaur bone, and the picture makes up for just having 50 words describing the dinosaur bone. So essentially, what we do in this unit with the psychology is on one hand, we have the exhibit technique, the type 1, type 2, type 3, and on the other hand, we have what goes in the exhibit, the original things. So if I had a glass case, which is a type 3, but I had real artifacts in it, the real artifacts would have more attraction power. So one of the things I'm doing, and as you read this unit, you'll see it, is we learn how to balance what goes in the exhibit with the style of the exhibit. So that's what the exhibit load concept is all about. That's what this handout is about. And I asked you for your homework to think about assigning an exhibit load number, a 1, a 2A, a 2B, or a 3, to some actual exhibits that you might have in an exhibit gallery or at your museum at your site. And if you have too many type 3s in a row, what happens is people just zip right by them. If you have too many type 1s, they tend to hold people longer, so you might get kind of a jam in your exhibit flow. So, and remember too, with a type 1, type 2, and type 3, that the exhibit you're looking at is affected by the exhibit to the right of it, and the exhibit to the left of it, and the exhibit behind it. So they're all pulling and tugging at each other. And so that's why we try to have a nice mix of 1s, 2s, and 3s. There's a little more to it. You know, in an actual exhibit class I'd be lecturing at a university, we would actually probably spend a whole day, maybe a couple days, on this concept. For this course, I want you to be aware of the concept. I want you to be thinking about type 1s, type 2s, and type 3s, and just how, you know, as an interpretive exhibit planner, we need to think about these. So that's it for unit number 5 on exhibit load. Have a look at it. I'll look forward to seeing your homework assignments, and then I'll meet you here when we get started on unit number 6. Have a good one. Bye-bye.